Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and today I wanted to talk about whether you can trust a play text. And within that, I guess I want to talk about what does it mean to read a play versus watch a play, and also, just do like play text scripts, do they lie? Obviously, I want to historicize because I always want to do that as it is like a part of my like literary practice, I guess, but it's also just like important to me. So I think this video is going to concentrate on like early modern British drama, but I do also think some of, if not all of them, because of like differences to like technological printing processes, like editorializing, theory, etc. I think some of these things will still be relevant to reading contemporary play texts versus watching them, or contemporary scripts versus watching them. I've been doing a bunch of reading of plays and then also listening and reading around them as well in terms of like literary criticism. And in Emma Smith's preface to the Cambridge Companion to the First Folio, Shakespeare's First Folio that is, Emma Smith like describes that literary forms have like an implacable materiality to them. And I love that, and I kind of feel like that's sort of some of the framing of this video. I will leave my references and things to check out in the description box. So another question, I guess, that's like 3 questions, but I think they're all kind of saying the same thing, but I guess I just want to talk it through really. But yeah, the other kind of question here, I guess, is if you only have access to a play text, should you read it, or is it going to give you such a misleading, such a mistaken, such an inaccurate picture of what the play is? Like, is it worth it still? Like, is it worth it to do that? Are you engaging with the play meaningfully still by doing that? I guess I'm also being like a little bit hyperbolic. I obviously I'm not going to be like nobody should read play text ever, but I do think that reading a play is different to seeing it, and yeah, we'll get into some of the kind of reasons why I would say that. And I think especially when we're thinking about historical plays, some play texts are considered to be corrupted, which is to say that they have come down to us in forms that seem to be inaccurate to what they actually were. An example of this is in the play The Spanish Tragedy. The character Hieronymo, in his like final death speech, he says, "But never shalt thou force me to reveal the thing which I have vowed inviolate." And he's already spoken about the main reason, at least from the play that we have, for like taking his revenge. This is like a revenge tragedy story, and he's the one who's, I suppose maybe he's not, considering there's lots of kind of forces within the play pulling and pushing, and then it kind of he's finally galvanized by another character to enact his revenge in a very like meta theatrical way. But anyway, in this speech, he's already talked about his reasoning behind his revenge, but then has said, like, I will never be forced to reveal this thing that I vowed never to say. And so that has left people to wonder if this play has been like corrupted in some way. Is there something missing? Like, what else is it that he wanted not to share? So there's an example of that. Obviously also censorship is like present in all time periods, but just with lessering degrees of visibility, acceptance, I don't know, technological commitment. But some plays were obviously censored. There was a 1606 act about the kinds of language that you could use in terms of like religious expressions in plays. So I think the play Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe is an example where some of the language, especially in terms of like saying things about Christ or God, or that in that sense, I think they were cut in later versions of the play. But I will also talk more actually about Dr. Faustus later, because it's also a really great example of some of the issues I guess I want to talk about today. Other reasons are also like, I think the original character name for Falstaff in Shakespeare's plays, specifically Henry IV Part 1 and 2, Henry V, and also the Merry Wives of Windsor of Falstaff, John Falstaff. He was originally called John Oldcastle, but people who were related, I believe, I might be incorrect about this, but I'm pretty sure that people who were related to him didn't like that he was called Oldcastle in the play, so that was changed, definitely in the print edition. Here's a reminder that I definitely don't know everything. Whilst I love, Jacobean, Elizabethan time period literary culture, this isn't my actual academic area. Which is just to say that I might make mistakes, which leads us on to the next thing, which is like perfect segue, because sometimes people make mistakes, which can range from sort of like typos in play text. They might have been working from like a copy text and then like not been able to read the person's writing, or they just might have made some kind of strange typo or syntactical error. Also in terms of editorializing, which definitely comes through in terms of like the practical considerations of printing, which obviously again is like a technology that has changed, but in the Tudor era, in the early modern era, like was this like very physical process which enabled mistakes to happen in particular ways. But also specifically editorializing around the printing of these books is also part of how we experience a mediated form of the original, whether that can ever have existed. It's maybe up for debate, but So for example, the people printing the first folio, like Shakespeare's first folio in 1623, they tried to save space in lots of ways. So in order to do that, they cut lines. For example, in the folio, like in the first folio, lines are cut from Much Ado About Nothing, which are present in the 1600 quarto. So the lines, "Here come the prince and Claudio," are not present in 1623. I don't think you can make the case that that is cutting like something very big, but clearly it's impacting the shape of the play text that we then ultimately read. There are definitely quite a lot of examples of this. I just didn't want to go into like a long list of telling you specific lines that weren't in the first folio but were in the quarto versions of various plays, but you can definitely find those. Another thing that impacts our reading of these plays in a way that potentially allows us to misinterpret the plays themselves and the kind of political meanings or the overall statements that they're making is the order in which they're printed. And I guess this is more of a specifically Shakespearean thing because it's most obvious in the first folio. I suppose maybe Ben Jonson's like collected works he did maybe does some of this too, but I definitely don't know enough about Ben Jonson to say anything about that, because he edited it himself. It's a little different, I think, in terms of figuring out the editorial choices he made, because the author of the plays did that, as opposed to it being mediated through like extra authorial workers in some way, like literary cultural practitioners, including like bookmakers. The point is, in the first folio, the history plays, obviously it comes to us in this like comedies, tragedies, history. So in the history plays section, the like Henriade plays, the Hollow Crown plays, we call them like a few different things. Those plays have been placed in chronological order, chronological to the play as opposed to when it was written or performed. So the sort of like English history plays, they start with King John and they go through Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, Henry V, Henry V, Richard III, Henry VI Part 1 to 3. Is that right? I think that's the right order, but anyway, the point is that's how we then have like taken in that they need to be like seen or considered as part of an actual order. But if you look at the performance and the writing of these plays, it tells a completely different story. And it also means that the kind of political readings that have been made from this chronology are maybe less pertinent than people thought. And if you were going to a play to see like Henry VI Part 1, there wasn't the same sense of it being in a line of following plays. Whereas when we read them chronologically, every ending of each play before the next is not complete, in a way that probably wasn't really that accurate to the like viewing experience, but also, yeah, like I said, because these plays are all about like dynasties and accession and the creation ultimately of the Tudor monarchy itself, the kind of like the takeaways from seeing it in chronological order I think is different when you just watch one bit. Plus, I think the first plays to be performed from this like English history cycle, so-called, were Henry VI Part 1 and 2, I think, and also Richard III. So that's like near the end of the chronological cycle. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. So playtexts also come down to us through history in multiple different forms. One example of this is, to keep talking about Shakespeare for a moment, sorry, is Hamlet, which sort of like famously, infamously has three main texts, I believe, that like versions are taken from. It obviously has a first folio edition, which is, I think, like the one that is considered the most like legitimate, even if, you know, that could definitely not be true. It also has a 1604/1605 quarto version, which is the second quarto, and it has a first quarto, which is the 1603 quarto, which this is like a comparison of the 1623 and the 1603 one. In full disclosure, I have not read the 1603 Hamlet yet, but I got this so that I could. But the 1603 quarto has been nicknamed like the bad quarto, and a lot of it is very different than the 1623. And also, I mean, I think what it seems like from what I've understood is generally editors have like mashed together the 1623 and the 1604/5 version of Hamlet to get the one that they think like aesthetically / whatever is up to their idea of what William Shakespeare would make most sort of accurate version through that. The 1603 version of the to be or not to be speech is like really, really different. Shall I read it to you? To be or not to be? Aye, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? Aye, all. No, to sleep, to dream. Aye, marry, there it goes. For in that dream of death, when we're awaked and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country, at whose sight the happy smile and the accursed damned. But for this, the joyful hope of this, who'd bear the scorns and flattery of the world, scorned by the right rich, the rich cursed of the poor, the widow being oppressed, the orphan wronged, the taste of hunger or a tyrant's reign, and thousand more calamities besides, to grunt and sweat under this weary life, when that he may his full quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would this endure, but for a hope of something after death, which puzzles the brain and doth confound the sense, which makes us rather bear those evils we have, than fly to others that we know not of? Aye, that, oh, this conscience makes cowards of us all. Lady, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered. And I think another really like interesting example of this is the play Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. Because Dr. Faustus comes to us as two main sources, what is called an A text and a B text. The A text is from a 1604 quarto edition, and the B text is from a 1616 quarto. There are quite a lot of differences between the texts. The A text is shorter. It doesn't have as many of the kind of like performance like stunts, I guess. Maybe some of the clowning, I think, also. Whereas the B text is quite a lot longer. And also there is this idea that the B text has more like non-Marlowe additions. But what complicates the idea that you could just say the A text is clearly the first text, it was produced first, so it's the original, and the B text is just full of like the additions of other authors. But what complicates that is that in 1602, a note in the diary of Philip Henslow, who was the owner of the Rose Theatre, he noted that he paid £4 to playwrights William Byrd and Samuel Rowley for additions to Dr. Faustus, and that was in 1602, so that's 2 years before the first quarto or the A text appeared. So in Dr. Faustus's case, it seems like there's no original text that can ever be returned to. I read a chapter in a book whose name I do not remember, but I guess it must have been about Christopher Marlowe. But the chapter was called Editing Marlowe's Text by Andrew Duxfield, and I'd really recommend it. It also has this really great quote, which is, "The Marlowe that one might read in a modern edition has undergone a complex process of mediation in order to exist in its presentable format. A modern edition doesn't give us unalloyed access to what Marlowe wrote, but rather a reconstruction informed by its editor's interpretive and aesthetic preference, and by the cultural and political climate in which it was produced." A lot of discussion of the A text versus the B text, or a lot of the kind of like value judgments around those, has been based primarily off of very particular aesthetic judgments that has said, oh, well, the A text has really bad stuff in it, so it can't be the original, or the B text has really boring stuff in it, so it can't be the original. And I think that also speaks to another kind of issue around all of this stuff, is that these plays are not just able to exist free from the like judgments of literary scholars, like, I don't know, the establishment, cultural institutions that want to shore up particular legacies, and instead they are mediated, constrained, reconstructed in order to better suit people today's idea of people of the past. Some of the arguments around the A text not being the original is that it was described or seen as vulgar and unseemly, which I feel like you can immediately see is simply a value judgment instead of a real genuine engagement with what could indicate or demonstrate that it is a version that has like extra authorial pieces that are not by Christopher Marlowe. I hope that makes sense. Another aspect that I think is part of the reader/viewer of a play or a reader of a play text is like the real versus the unreal. I guess by that I mean that within a play, what is said is different to what is read, because in a play text, for example, you have the name of the character before you have what they say. But especially in plays where there is like identity, playing, confusion, or there's like gender play, cross-dressing, like disguise, that kind of thing, the knowledge that a reader has of a character's like real gender is very different than a play watcher's awareness of a character's real gender is, or potentially is. Obviously it can be complicated, and sometimes it's this like knowing play on stage as well as in a text. But I guess, for example, like I do think this is kind of important in terms of the gender nonconformity of Twelfth Night. It's only if you read the play text of Twelfth Night do you know that Viola's name is Viola all the way through. Whereas if you watch the play, you encounter a character who's been shipwrecked, who decides to disguise herself as a man, and you know her as Cesario, which is the name that everybody else knows her by. And it's only when her brother is introduced on stage at the end of the play that she's called Viola, and we come to know her in that particular way. And I think that's quite interesting. I feel like that really shifts the emphasis or the understanding of the play's focus on gender and disguise. I do also think that the play The Roaring Gull by Thomas Dekker and Thomas Middleton has some of this also real, unreal category blurring differences, because again, this is like a play very much about gender and also about women dressing as men, but also obviously because of the laws at the time of like throughout, you know, Elizabethan Jacobean theatre, like that women were not allowed to perform on stage. There's already this like double gender play going on stage because the parts for women were being played by boys generally, or like young men. And so that layers some of the gender like transgression, the gender play even more than when you just read the play. Obviously that's kind of like a basic point, but I also think when gender is explicitly on the table being explored in these plays, which is going on in The Roaring Gull, that's also really vital to think about in terms of historically and performances in the past. Also with this play, in terms of real, unreal stuff, I think it's really interesting because it's based off of a real woman who's called Moll Cutpurse. There is apparently Moll Cutpurse. And at the end there is of this, I think it was said at the beginning in performances, but I could be wrong, there is a suggestion that the real Moll Cutpurse, as opposed to the Moll Cutpurse of the play, but the real one came and performed in the play at one point at the Fortune Theatre, I think is what it was called. Maybe the most kind of obvious reason why a play text, when you read it, is not the same as watching a play is because it's inanimate. You can't actually witness the gestures of the actors. You can't witness the like emphasis, the stressing or unstressing of parts, the movement of the play itself. That's almost completely absent. Some obviously do have stage directions, which might describe what a character is doing, but also stage directions tend to be fairly sparse, and I think sometimes are added by editors in order to make it clear like who's on stage. I think quite a lot of the stage directions in the first folio, for example, were added and weren't necessarily present in the like copy text they were working from. I think another thing that is obviously part of this is accent, and I guess this is way more to do with like early modern plays. There's actually a video of, I think, David Crystal and his son, who's like a famous sort of, I don't know, like literary, like linguistic type person, saying and like showing the difference between how something in a Shakespeare play would sound in the accent of the time, or like a reconstruction of the accent at the time, versus in a more modern accent. And that clearly does change how we would interpret things. The accent definitely, at least in the examples in that video, changed how jokes would maybe be received or understood. I think, to be honest, it's actually that they became visible as jokes when they were done in the original or reconstructed accent versus not. And also just in terms of like rhymes, things like that, so the sort of like lyrical quality or the rhythm of the play or the language itself changes a bit too. I don't know that I think it has like a really major impact, but I do think it's like part of this, and it's part of the like inanimate way that if you read a play text you don't have any engagement with that. And also obviously if you go to see a play text now, unless it's done specifically on purpose in a reconstructed Shakespearean accent, I guess you won't see that either. But then if you saw the play in like a northern accent casting, then you would maybe get a sense of some of it anyway. So another thing that's obviously missing when you read a play text is the audience itself. Going to see a play is an actively, purposefully communal event, which is to say you're supposed to be surrounded by people who are seeing the same thing, but having a collective experience with it, and perhaps egging each other on in particular ways. I had this really wonderful experience once where I went to see Much Ado About Nothing, and when Beatrice and Benedict kissed, this woman in the audience gasped. And it was like really sweet and touching that she did that, because it meant that the kind of romantic moment of it actually really came through. And that is something that you just 100% will miss out on if you just read the play by yourself. I think I kind of have touched on some of these things like as I've been going, but I also did want to say, like, obviously I haven't been focusing on like interpretations of the text and how in performance these can be massively changed depending on like the emphasis or the specific casting, the setting that is chosen for the play. Those things can all impact how you read it, whereas again, if you're reading it yourself, all you have is your own imagination. I think another part of interpretation, especially in terms of like how the audience treats the play and how the like director or creator or company behind the play treat it, is authorship, specifically as a contrast between early modern dramatic culture and ours now. Like, even just from the get-go, I think that you'll generally approach going to see a Shakespeare play, even if you're trying not to, like as a different kind of cultural artifact or experience than if you're going to see a contemporary play by a contemporary playwright. Or you might treat going to see a Shakespeare play way differently than you would treat seeing a play by a contemporary of Shakespeare. Contemporaries who, for the most part, are seen as being like stepping stones towards Shakespeare's greatness, or like simply never as good as Shakespeare. And clearly, like, attitudes towards authorship are very different now than then. The Witch of Edmonton, for example, it says it's written by diverse, well-esteemed poets, William Rowley, Thomas Dekker, John Ford, and etc. Like, who's and etc.? The final kind of aspect of this, I guess, is like the structure of the stage itself and how much of it you can see as an audience member. I think that would really impact how you might think about certain scenes if you can only see one part of a character, or because of your placement you might be able to see like a particular interaction that you wouldn't have noticed if you were from a different perspective. So again, I think watching a play in one go is sort of a testament to a play's like complicated malleability of meaning, because it's a whole experience. I hope that's like made sense. I've just been like very into early modern drama at the moment. I just wanted to make something about the reading and thinking that I guess I've done recently about early modern drama and these play texts and their production as distinct objects that are supposed to be records of performances but are so incomplete in that respect. And yeah, I mean, to return to that question that I posed at the beginning of like whether you should read a play text if you can't watch the play, I think of course you should if you want to. You know, just bearing in mind the fact that it's a fundamentally incomplete text, but you know, we forgive them for it because they can still be really useful to glean a lot from. And ultimately it's precisely because plays are themselves such like interesting and tricksy forms that can't be pinned down just in words alone, which as a literary form is a very like exciting prospect, I guess, because it's inherently kind of frustrating your desire to get the complete original version when a performance can't ever be bottled up, and that's what makes it a performance. Plays themselves in performance can be more communal, more immersive, responsive, forgiving, difficult, contradictory, and ultimately more and always malleable. Did this make sense? I hope so. Let me know your thoughts about what I was saying, or any plays that you think I should have mentioned as perfect examples for what I was talking about. I hope the lighting hasn't gotten too bad. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'm doing a Q&A video actually, so if you have any questions for that, you can just comment them below as well. But I guess if you're asking me a question specifically about play stuff, I probably won't answer it, because this is what this video is about. Yeah, I hope you're having a good day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!